At this time, I will yield to Mr. Tim Scott. I believe he has something that should be called to our attention.
For what purpose the gentleman from South Carolina rise?
Statement for filing a rule. Mr. Speaker, I send to the desk a privileged report from the Committee on Rules for filing under the rule.
The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
Report to accompany House Resolution 448, resolution providing for consideration of the bill, H.R. 2576, to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to modify the calculation of modified adjusted gross income for purposes of determining eligibility for certain health care-related programs, and providing for consideration of the bill, H.R. 674, to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to repeal the imposition of 3% withholding on certain payments made to vendors by government entities.
Refer to the House calendar and order it printed. The gentleman from Texas may proceed.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, would you please make me aware of the amount of time that we have left so that I may accord it appropriately?
The gentleman has 27 minutes remaining.
27 minutes. Mr. Johnson of Georgia is now going to be yielded approximately 5 minutes. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Green, my colleague from Texas, fellow barrister. I myself practiced law for 27 years before becoming a congressman. Much of that time was spent as a criminal defense lawyer, and 12 years of that time was spent as a magistrate court judge. And so I have an intimate awareness of the domestic violence issue. And there are not many things, Mr. Speaker, that are more important than our responsibility for job creation in this Congress. Not many things can transcend that, but certainly this month, Domestic Violence Awareness Month, is a proper occasion to do that. And so, Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Between 1990 and 2005, Mr. Speaker, firearms were used to kill more than 2/3 of spouse and ex-spouse victims of domestic violence. And it's clear that the presence of guns makes domestic violence much more likely to result in death. According to one study, domestic violence assaults involving a firearm are 23 times more likely to result in death than those involving other weapons, such as the jar of gas that threatened the life of Yvette Kane, that my colleague from Texas alluded to. Most of these deaths will come from the use of firearms. And unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence in their lifetimes. We are talking about our mothers, our daughters, our sisters, and our friends. Their lives, Mr. Speaker, are at stake. The thing that disturbs me is that the Tea Party Republicans could care less about their lives because their allegiance belongs to the NRA. But let me tell you what really scares me. H.R. 822, the National Right to Carry Reciprocity Act of 2011. The Judiciary Committee reported this horrific bill out today. Every single Republican on that committee voted unanimously against every amendment that was posed by Democrats to try to make that bill more safe. And then with the final report of the bill out of committee, every single colleague on the other side of the aisle voted to issue that bill out favorably, with the exception of one Republican. This dangerous bill will allow domestic abusers to carry concealed guns nationwide, making it easier for domestic abusers to follow their victims across state lines. During the Judiciary Committee markup, I offered an amendment that would have kept concealed weapons out of the hands of domestic abusers. This common sense amendment to protect domestic violence victims was rejected unanimously by the Republicans on the Judiciary Committee. The Republicans, the Tea Party Republicans, stayed faithful to the NRA. Could you believe that they rejected amendments to keep concealed handguns out of the hands of sex offenders, suspected terrorists, anyone convicted of selling drugs to a minor, and anyone convicted of assaulting or impersonating a law enforcement officer? Ladies and gentlemen, although Halloween is right around the corner, we are not in the twilight zone. This is real life, and the Tea Party Republicans have sold out the safety of the American public to the NRA. It's truly a sad day in America when we move such legislation, especially during Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his comments, and at this time, I'm honored to bring to the floor a very dear friend from the state of California who has been an outspoken supporter of all of these bills to help victims of domestic violence, the Honorable Lynn Woozy.
Thank you, Mr. Green.
And if I may just, because the chair will not give us any indication as to how much time has lapsed as each member speaks, I'm going to ask members, if you can, and not directed to you specifically, but all members, to be conscious of the fact that we have about 5 more members who'd like to speak.
Right. And thank you for bringing this special order together, and with Congressman Poe. Okay, Mr. Speaker, every day millions of Americans, the great majority of them are women, live in fear of attack, not from a stranger lurking in the bushes or a dark alley, but perhaps even more frightening, from the partner with whom they share a home and a bed. Domestic violence is an assault on everything that matters in a woman's life: her physical safety, her dignity, self-respect, and her job security, as well as her capacity to be a good parent. Children are directly in the line of fire. Too often they also are physically abused, but mere exposure to the violence can cause behavioral issues ranging from poor academic performance and truancy to drug abuse and domestic violence of their very own. The societal impact, Mr. Speaker, is huge. Billions in health care costs, lost economic activity, and more. Domestic violence is a problem that affects all of us. Increased awareness in recent years had made a difference there, because there was a time when women trapped in a violent relationship had little recourse and faced the stigma that kept them from getting help. Just the fact that women are more likely to call 911 represents huge progress, but we have to do much more. For example, the Family Medical Leave Act allows employees to take unpaid time off from work after giving birth, adopting a child, or to care for a sick relative. Well, I've introduced a bill, the Domestic Violence Leave Act, H.R. 3151, that expands FMLA so workers can cope with the consequences of domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking. This would give people the time they need to seek medical care, to seek counseling, legal assistance, and otherwise heal, both physically and emotionally. Mr. Speaker, if we're serious about showing compassion for those who've suffered abuse, then we have to give them job flexibility. Being punched or raped by your partner is devastating enough. To also lose your income and livelihood as a result is a gross injustice. Let's make every month Domestic Violence Awareness Month by extending support to women and men who have experienced the pain and betrayal of domestic violence. One way to do this is to sign on and pass H.R. 3151, my legislation. Another is to make sure that we support and reauthorize the Violence Against Women's Act and all of the programs that that act supports. Thank you very much.
I thank you for your words, and I trust that you will continue the fight. You have been an outstanding champion for women's rights. At this time, I'm honored to yield time to the Honorable Barbara Lee, the former chairperson of the CBC, a great member from the state of California. And Mr. Speaker, before she speaks, will you give us some indication as to how much time we have left so that we'll all be aware?
Gentleman has about 19 minutes.
19 minutes? 19 minutes and about 5 people left to speak, dear friends.
Okay.
Some have come in and they've stepped out. The Honorable Barbara Lee.
Thank you very much. Let me thank Congressman Al Green and Congressman Ted Poe for their leadership in organizing the Special Order on Domestic Violence. It's critical to speak out against domestic violence and call attention to Domestic Violence Awareness Month, but it's extremely important to hear from men and to recognize your leadership on this. As someone who understands domestic violence on a deeply personal level, I know how traumatic this experience is and the strong, consistent support system needed to emerge as a survivor. And I also know from personal experience that domestic violence is not only physical, it is emotional. It is brutal, it is dehumanizing to the batterer and the battered. And without strong and enforceable criminal laws and services, one's life can be shattered and destroyed. And so as a survivor of domestic violence, once elected to the California legislature, I knew I had to do something. And I'm so glad to see my colleague, Congresswoman Jackie Spear, who was then in the legislature at that time. And we worked so hard on domestic violence issues. And I'll never forget, I was able to write California's Violence Against Women's Act, and wrote many, many domestic violence bills that were signed into law by a Republican governor. And again, coming to Congress now, we've worked together in co-sponsoring numerous bills in Congress to support victims of domestic violence and to prevent domestic violence. We've also worked extensively, and this is in my home district in Oakland, with a Safe Place, which is a victim-centered agency, because we know that staying in a shelter or working with an advocate significantly reduces the chances that a victim will be abused again and improves the victim's quality of life. A Safe Place in Oakland is Oakland's only comprehensive domestic violence program for battered women and children. They provide both shelter and professional supportive services to victims of domestic violence and have truly been a vital agency in my district. A Safe Place has served Oakland for 34 years and earlier this month held its 10th annual walk against domestic and teen dating violence. This walk continues to call attention to the issues of dating and domestic violence in the city of Oakland, building vital partnerships with law enforcement, the criminal justice system, and faith-based organizations to better serve the community and the region. Their programs and services are designated to address the many complicated, and I mean these are complicated issues which affect victims of domestic violence and are a true blessing to my constituents and my community. It's my hope that we use Domestic Violence Awareness Month to recommit ourselves to fighting the scourge of violence against women and men. We've made some accomplishments over the decades on this issue, but challenges still remain. Around the world, nearly 1 in 3 women has been beaten, coerced into sex, or otherwise abused in her lifetime. Here in the United States, as many as 1 in 3 American women report being physically or sexually abused by a husband or a boyfriend at least once in their lives. Children who see or experience domestic violence have a much greater chance to become either victims or perpetrators as adults. They're also more likely to attempt suicide, use drugs and alcohol, run away from home, engage in teenage prostitution, and commit other crimes. Beyond the cost to children, domestic violence affects the community, with as many as half of domestic violence victims reporting a loss of a job, at least in part due to domestic violence. And so cuts to domestic violence programs should not even be on the table. Women make up 70% of the deaths, mind you, deaths caused by intimate partner violence. And services and abuse for heterosexual men and those in the LGBT communities are clearly non-existent. And so although this is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, we can't just work on this during October. We must remember that for men, women, and children who are experiencing or who have experienced domestic violence, every day must be a day of awareness, also a day free from emotional badgering, physical assaults, harassment, stalking, and every other violent behavior which constitutes domestic violence. Thank you again, Mr. Green.
I thank the gentlelady from California, and at this time we will yield to another Californian, the Honorable Jim Costa. And how much time do we have, Mr. Speaker?
Okay, to revise that, you do have 19 minutes still. That was mistaken earlier.
All right. Thank you very much. That benefits the members. I yield to the gentleman. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Congressman Al Green and Judge Ted Poe, for organizing this special order to recognize National Domestic Violence Month. While I think I speak on behalf of all of us that we wish such a day was not necessary to commemorate, or such a month, it's important that we educate not only our colleagues but Americans on the tremendous challenges, the difficulties facing Americans who are dealing every day with domestic violence. Today, all of us stand up for the victims of those crimes, those heinous crimes, who too often suffer under the shadows. Just last week, I visited in Fresno the Central California Legal Services to announce a $500,000 grant that is to focus on victims of domestic violence in the San Joaquin Valley. What I saw and what I heard is a reminder of, sadly, what continues to occur throughout the country, because I've worked with these folks for many years. It's added burden today with the tough economic times we're living in that strain families, unemployment higher than it should be, unstable economic conditions, oftentimes mean higher stress and more incidences, sadly, of domestic violence. At the same time, we are reducing the kind of support at the federal and state level to provide for organizations that help these victims of crimes. So while more women and men suffer, and children under domestic violence, less support remains to help them. Congressman Judge Ted Poe and I founded the Victims' Rights Caucus in 2006 to be a bipartisan voice for victims' rights in Congress. One of the major initiatives that the caucus works on is the Protection of the Violence Against Women's Act, otherwise known as the VAWA. It was established in 1994 to grant funds for programs to state and local and Indian tribal governments. Today, this fund seeks to encourage the collaboration among law enforcement, judicial personnel, and public-private service providers for the victims of domestic and sexual violence. Another goal of this fund is to increase public awareness of the domestic violence and address the needs of these folks who are victims of sexual and domestic violence that occurs within our communities. This fund has been a source of much resource because it's been able to provide support for more victims to report domestic violence to the police, often one of the most difficult cases that our local law enforcement agencies will tell you that they deal with on a daily basis. They also provide monies for the rate of non-fatal domestic violence, and this has helped decrease violence in many areas across the country. It also has reduced the amount of acts of crime of killing an intimate partner. Last year, the decrease was 24%. Oftentimes, sadly, these domestic violence cases result in death. And while much progress has been made, obviously much more needs to be done. Crime victims, as has been said before, but I'll say it again, are our mothers, they're our fathers, they're our sisters, they're our brothers. They're our friends, and they are our neighbors. They are people that we all know of. They deserve our support. They deserve the vital services to help them cope during these horrific time periods within their lives. As the National Domestic Violence Month continues, let us all do everything we can to encourage folks to attend events, to recognize and honor those who are at the vanguard of trying to protect those who are victims of violence. Those good people who are out working in this areas like the Central California Legal Services Foundation. Those who are in law enforcement, those who are in our justice system, those who are in every way working in our communities to help those victims of domestic violence and sexual abuse. Only through education and awareness will our communities be able to ultimately someday end this domestic scourge and respond more effectively to those victims. I want to thank Congressman Green again for his efforts, and Congressman Poe and my other colleagues who have spoken so well today. Today's special order, let it be a call for all of us to action, to continue advancing the rights of victims across the nation, and to protect the Violence Against Women's Act. I yield the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman for his words, and at this time we will yield to the gentlelady from Texas, who is a colleague, and we share a common boundary in the state of Texas. Our districts are adjacent to each other, the Honorable Sheila Jackson Lee.
Let me thank Congressman Al Green and Congressman Poe for convening us today on such a very important topic that includes the issue of domestic violence in this Domestic Violence Awareness Month. As a senior member of the Judiciary Committee, it's been my privilege, sadly, however, to have worked on the Violence Against Women's Act for a very long time and was an original co-sponsor and author of the reauthorization of that bill some years ago. My initial premise on this day that we express our concern is that the laws need to be stronger. And I simply want to acknowledge, as we have worked on these issues, that domestic violence has not decreased in spite of all of the hard-working advocacy groups and places of refuge for the women in our communities. I want to acknowledge the Houston Women's Center, of which I served as a member of the board for a number of years, and the great work that they do along with many other organizations in the Houston area that are refuges for women. But let me cite these numbers to you. The National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, 85% of all domestic violence victims are women, and I do want to acknowledge that men suffer domestic violence as well. We are sympathetic and want to include them in fighting against this dastardly deed. It is disturbing that every 9 seconds a woman in the United States is assaulted or beaten. More often than not, she knows her abuser. The numbers are alarming. Between 2000 and 2005, about 63% of non-fatal intimate partner victimization against women occurred at home. 9.4% of these attacks were near home, and 11.1% of the abuse occurred at a friend or neighbor's home. The aggressors were often intimate partners, relative friends, acquaintances, and even strangers. Every year, nearly 5.3 million women over the age of 18 will be victims of domestic violence. And according to the report by the Center for Disease Control Prevention, this violence will result in nearly 2 million injuries and 1,300 deaths. In the state of Texas, for example, at least 74% of Texans know someone who has experienced some form of physical, sexual, or verbal abuse, yet these incidents remain underreported because there is great fear. According to the Houston Area Women's Center, which, as I indicated, I served as a member of the board, 142 women were murdered in Texas by an abusive partner. The youngest of these victims were only 17 years old, and the oldest was 78. In 2007, the center served over 2,800 survivors of domestic violence and took almost 39,000 calls. As I conclude, I want to just give this brief story of a recent 17-hour attack that occurred in Houston, which was noted as one of the worst local domestic abuse cases ever. A man's tortured wife follows years of abuse, and this lady never reported it because of her fear of the impact or the abuse or the violence against her 4 children. While this horrific act was taking place, it was occurring while her 1-year-old daughter was in another room. This 33-year-old woman was violated by this vicious man with a long record of absolute insanity and violence, with using a hairspray can and a lighter match and taking a match with that hairspray to her breasts and her genitals. Right now, I stand on this floor in absolute outrage. Sheriff Adrian Garcia likened the suspect to an animal, and that he is. Rabid dogs. The terrible part of this is that he is charged with the assault to a relative. I frankly want him to be charged with a much more heinous act, because in many instances, when you're charged with this particular action, which the legislature probably thought that these were relatives against relatives, but this was a heinous act. This gentleman should never see the light of day. And there are actors like this around the nation and around the world, by the way, because there is that kind of violence around the world that should never see the light of day. As we continue to work on this, I will continue to advocate funding, as I provided funding for our local agencies in Houston, and I will continue to champion stronger laws to prevent, if I can, in terms of the stronger laws and intervention, so that women can have the strength to go to places like the Houston Area Women's Center and to save them from this heinous and dastardly act. This woman will be mutilated for life and will have to have reconstructive surgery. Again, a can of hairspray and a lighter match for 17 hours while her 1-year-old child remained in a room. Let me thank again our colleagues for allowing us to come to the floor. And again, let me make a commitment to all of the women out there and those in Houston and Texas that I will never step away from fighting for you not to suffer this indignity. Please leave the home and go to a refuge like the Houston Area Women's Center and other places to save your life. I yield back.
I thank the lady, and at this time we will yield to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Spear. And I would also add that this is a colleague who served with me on financial services, and I found that she has been a strong advocate for the rights of women.
Thank you to my colleague, and thank you to the gentleman, Mr. Green, for hosting this special order on domestic violence. Mr. Speaker, and I also want to pay my respects to Congressman Poe for his participation as well. Imagine that you were beaten at the hands of your boyfriend or husband, maybe in front of your child. Now imagine that before you were able to call the police, your attacker fled. But he doesn't get far before the police catch him and throw him in jail. But days later, he is set free, not on bail, but with a clean record. And he's angry, more so because he first beat you, and now he wants to get revenge because you caused him to be arrested. No, this isn't a scene from a horror movie. It is, instead, a dose of reality from Topeka, Kansas, where the City Council voted earlier this month to repeal the city law against misdemeanor domestic battery. The Council claimed that budget woes required this act of public policy cowardice. By repealing this law, Topeka sent a clear message to the women. Your safety is not a priority. We will not protect you. If you are victimized, we will not hold your spouse, former spouse, boyfriend, or live-in accountable if they assault you. You are on your own. And this happened in a city where a domestic violence murder occurs every 10 days, a domestic violence incident occurs every 22 minutes, and a person is, or I should say was, charged with domestic violence every 41 minutes, but no more in Topeka, Kansas. These are tough times for local and state governments. Everyone is being asked to do more with less. Difficult choices must be made. But let me say this without hesitation. The choices made during difficult times reflect who we are as Americans, who we are as human beings, and our mutual respect for the law. The Topeka decision is another example of how women in this country are becoming second-class citizens, or chattel, or even less. We shun our global neighbors who allow violence to openly occur without repercussions. Today, as we recognize Domestic Violence Awareness Month and the more than 1 million victims that are terrorized every year, I urge each and every state and locality in our great United States to take a stand against what just occurred in Topeka, Kansas. Shame on Topeka, Kansas. Shame on them for not recognizing one of the most grievous acts that occurs in a local community. Domestic violence is one of the most reported incidents and one of the ones that police, frankly, are the most concerned about going out to because more often than not there is violence associated with it. For the sake of nearly 16 million children that are exposed to domestic violence each year and the women who are abused every 9 seconds, we must recommit ourselves to supporting domestic violence victims. Speaking of tough times, domestic violence shelters know a thing or two about pinching pennies. 3/4 of the shelters nationally report losing money from government sources since the recession. And as their belts are tightened, the demand for their services have only increased. For the 3rd straight year, 80% of shelters nationwide are reporting an increase in domestic violence cases. You know, I was always struck when I was in the state legislature that there were 3 times as many animal shelters as there were battered women's shelters. It says volumes about where our priorities are in this country. 3 out of 4 shelters attributed the rise in violence to financial issues. Almost half said that those issues included job loss, and 42% cited the loss of a house or car. More than half of the shelters also reported that domestic abuse is more violent than it was before the financial crash. Studies show that abuse is 3 times as likely to occur when a couple experiences financial strain. Take note, a 5-year study reveals that when a man experienced 2 or more periods of unemployment, he was almost 3 times as likely to abuse his female partner. The irony was, Topeka's decision is that domestic violence is expensive to the communities where it is more prevalent. And I'm not talking about the cost of prosecutions. I'm talking about the $8 to $10 billion in lost productivity, medical bills, and other costs. In fact, between 1/4 to 1/2 of domestic violence victims report that they lost a job, at least in part due to domestic violence. And if we do not prevent these crimes and penalize those that commit them, we will pay tenfold in the years to come. Studies show that 60% of the nearly 16 million children who witness domestic abuse every year mimic it later in their lives. We have our work cut out for us, but one thing that defines our country is the notion that anyone who abuses another human being, woman or man, will be brought to justice. When Topeka, Kansas decriminalized domestic violence earlier this month, we took a huge and unacceptable step backwards. In honor of the victims who have lost their lives to domestic violence and those who live in fear every day, let us recommit ourselves today to their safety. I yield back, and thank you again to Mr. Green.
I thank the lady, and I especially thank the lady for citing the statistical information. It's important for our nation and our country to understand that these are real people that are being harmed, and that this is not something that occurs in some segments of society. This crosses all lines, economic lines, gender lines, political lines, and it's up to us to have bipartisan efforts to end this. I'm honored that my friend Mr. Poe has joined us today. This has been a bipartisan effort, but we've got to get this message back to the community, because indifference is what allows this to continue to a certain extent. No one should be indifferent. Everybody has a duty to report it. Everybody has a duty to condone it. And if we do this, then we can make this persona non grata, every person who performs an act of violence persona non grata in our communities. I want to thank the Speaker for the time. 1 hour is never enough to cover all that we should cover, but I'm grateful to the leadership for giving us the 1 hour that we've had, and that this time we yield back the time that I'm sure we do not have. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields back his time. Yeah, there he is. Okay. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my honor to be recognized here to address you on the floor. And I'd like to, before I go into my presentation, go into the subject matter that the gentleman from Texas has led this previous special order on, just as a means of discussing a way to look at victims' rights. And for me, I was caused to re-examine the situation. As a victim, I'd had some heavy equipment that was destroyed by vandals back in the year 1987, the year that shall live in infamy, and it was in the middle of the farm crisis years. A lot of that damage was uninsured, but we did catch the perpetrators, and a long, long story. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars of damage. I followed through on everything, seeing myself as a victim who had an obligation to assist the prosecution as a citizen and a victim would and should. And I remember sitting in the courtroom in Sac City, Iowa, when they were brought up the trial of one of the perpetrators. And the bailiff announced to the court, this is a case of the state versus Jason Martin Powell. And I sat there thinking, how is it the state versus the perpetrator? I'm not in this equation. I'm not even the versus. I'm just here as a spectator. And so I began to examine what that really means. And what it means is that the state and the law enforcement component, in this case the state, is the intervener. If you have a grievance with someone, and I certainly had a grievance with the people that destroyed my equipment and nearly destroyed my business, then before the law and order days, that would be settled in some other fashion, likely in some violent fashion if you go back a couple thousand years or 3,000 years before the law was established in places like Mosaic law or Roman or Greek law. But as law was established, it was to eliminate the vigilante component of this, and the state stepped in and intervened. And another way of looking at it would be when everything was owned by the state. The subjects in, let's say, Old Western Europe, Old England, the subjects were the property of the king. The state supplanted the king. The subjects and everything they owned were the property and the ownership of the king in England. So when you see Old English common law and you see how it transfers into the United States and it becomes the state versus Jason Martin Powell, the perpetrator, convicted perpetrator, I will say his name into the record here now. That transfer was, if you committed a crime, if you shot one of the king's deer, if you murdered or assaulted one of the king's subjects, you were committing a crime against the king. So in our society, when you commit a crime, you're committing a crime against the state. And I'm taking us all to this point, Mr. Speaker, because once the state is satisfied that they have established justice, the victim doesn't really have anything more to say about it. The victim's not in that equation. My position needs to be developed more than it is, but my point is that if the state's going to intervene, then the state has to enforce the law, then the state has to protect the citizens adequately, and when they fail, then what's the obligation of the state? They're not ensuring us to be protected from violent crime. They're simply doing the best they can without a consequence for the state. And all the way around that circle is this, that back in those years, I remember a study that was done, and that study was it'll come to me in a moment, but it was a 1995 study, and in that study, they put a value on each crime. And I remember that a rape victim, they valued murder at around $1 million. They valued rape at around $82,000. Now, I can't imagine who would submit to rape for $82,000, but that was the quantity. And then they also put in that study that a criminal who was loose on the street, an average criminal loose on the street, would commit $444,000 worth of crime in a year. Well, it costs about $20,000 a year to lock them up. They do $444,000 worth of damage to the society in a year. But when that damage is not compensated, that comes out of crime victims in great, huge, whopping chunks of their lives, their security, and their property. And so I would just suggest that if the state were liable for all of the damage that's caused by perpetrators, we would have a more effective criminal justice system. I'm not advocating that we bring that forward in this Congress, but I just discussed that way of looking at this, how we got to this point where the state is the intervener because the state's the successor to the Crown in Old English common law, and a crime committed under the Crown was a crime committed against the king because he owned everything, and it damaged their ability, even if it was a serf's ability to produce. And then, so we are now the successor philosophy, but we've forgotten this part that victims are paying the price. The state is not paying the price. It's no longer a crime against the state, even though the state is the intervener. And I yield to the gentleman from Texas and thank him for presenting this. And it sparked that memory, and I wanted to put that into the record and let you know how I think about the crime victims, Mr. Green from Texas.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I especially thank you for placing things in a proper historical context. It's greatly appreciated. Having taught a class myself in trial simulation, one of the things that we discussed was the origin of the concept of the state. And it evolved to the extent that you've called to our attention, but it also became a we the people country. Our country is a we the people country, and sometimes if we substitute for the state we the people, because it becomes the people in many places against a defendant, and I think it's appropriate that it be the people against a defendant. I think we as a society have some things that we will not tolerate. And as a result, we have codified these things into laws that carry penalties with them. And these penalties, in my opinion, have to be imposed so as to maintain an orderly society. I would mention to my friend this. You said $82,000 for rape. I just have to make sure that I go on record saying I agree with you. $82,000, I cannot imagine how someone managed to conclude that $82,000 was the worth of a person having been raped or that crime itself. I support the notion that we must compensate victims. Victims ought to be compensated appropriately, which is one of the reasons why I have supported the Violence Against Women Act, and I'm hoping that we'll get it reauthorized because it does establish a fund so that the victims of crimes of this nature can have their perpetrators pay money into this fund so as to make sure the victims are properly compensated. And I think you and I together today want to make sure that the people, we the people, are heard, and we the people in the courts of this country can take the necessary steps to prevent, but also, not only to prevent, but also compensate the victims of these dastardly deeds.
And reclaiming my time, and I thank the gentleman from Texas for making those points. We the people have vested our authority in our government, and that's how that transfer takes place. But I remember clearly the bailiff saying the state versus, and yes, that rang my bell, and I looked back through history to understand the root of that. And I would point out also that the $82,000 for a rape victim, I believe, was quantified in this way: loss of work, medical treatment, psychological treatment, that kind of impact that was just simply the economic impact on her life, not the emotional impact and the trauma. But even still, to quantify that, and the Department of Justice has quantified crime also with different values, and I don't recall them well enough from that chart, but I know there was a 1992 Department of Justice study that laid some values out. I think if we could, there would be a plus for us, even though pain and suffering and the loss of life is immeasurable in a dollar form. If we could quantify it in a way, we'd begin to understand what crime does to this society, and that would be helpful if we could move down that path. It's been a long time since there's been a real broad study done in this country that laid the complete loss of all of the crime in the United States that are committed. I would think it's in the billions of dollars. We accept it because because it's a victim here and a victim there. It's not like they're all coming together in one large group. It's scattered out across our society, and the higher the level of crime in your community, the higher your tolerance has been because of the continual incidence of that violence. But I appreciate the sentiment from the gentleman of Texas, and I wanted to add some words to the sentiment that you have brought to this floor here tonight in this Congress.
I thank the gentleman for his comments, and I greatly appreciate the time that you took from your time to continue to elaborate on this. It means a lot to the people that we both represent, and I thank you again.
I reclaim my time, and again, to thank the gentleman from Texas. I came here to talk about a couple of other subject matters, Mr. Speaker, and the one that's on the front of my mind that I want to make sure I address is the Missouri River flooding that has taken place all down the Missouri River drainage area all summer long. And I think the rest of the country hasn't been brought to their attention how bad and how devastating this flood is. You can pick your river in the world, and you'll know that every river has flooded in history. That's what they do. That's why we have river bottoms. They're flattened out because of the floods. And whether it's the Mississippi River flood or the Missouri River flood or any of the floods that we've had up and down the New Jersey floods, for example, and the other floods in the northeast part of the United States, they have been devastating. And we have watched on television as we've seen people scramble to get above the water line, to sandbag, to protect the assets that they have. We watched as the water flooded into New Orleans several years ago with Katrina, and the human suffering that went on down there. And some of us went down and did what we could, and myself, I've made 4 trips down to Katrina to try to lend a hand down there, and I've contributed in some way, and I say in a small and humbly in a small way, Mr. Speaker. But this summer, Midwesterners, people in Missouri and Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, South Dakota, North Dakota, and Montana have all suffered from the greatest runoff experienced in recorded history in the Missouri River. This greatest runoff is accumulated this way. It wasn't particularly dramatic in snowcap in the wintertime, not particularly dramatic by March 1st as they measure that snowcap, but several things contribute to the runoff. It's the snow up in the mountains all the way up into Montana. It's the rainfall that takes place there, and then it's any dramatic rainfall events. All of those things came together in the perfect storm fashion. Late season, significantly higher snowcap up in the mountains, and then early spring rains that saturated and became a significant runoff, and on top of that, a very heavy rainfall event around particularly the Billings, Montana area, where they got 10 to 12 inches of rain. 8 inches, I think, in Billings, and 10 to 12 inches of rain across a vast area, some of it up to 15 inches in some areas. So the circumstances were we had all the snow that needed to come down, a large amount of snow. We had a lot more rain than expected. The ground was saturated, so it didn't soak in. That was running off from a broad rains across that had taken place in April and in May. And then on May 22nd, the massive rainfall that fell the Billings area and around that was unprecedented in its volume. All of that together created a runoff that, if you think of it in these terms, that in the largest experience that they had seen was actually 1997. Prior to that was 1881. In 1881, there were 42 million acre-feet of runoff. That's water a foot deep over 42 million acres, all of that volume, if you just calculate that volume, running off into the Missouri River. There are 6 dams that have been built in the upper Missouri River, the reservoirs created by them. And these 6 dams start in Montana and string down through North Dakota and South Dakota. The furthest most downstream one is Gavin's Point at Yankton, South Dakota, and that would be the last valve that controls the flow of the Missouri River from that point, just upstream from Sioux City, all the way down to St. Louis. That's the control valve at Gavin's Point. 42 million acre-feet of runoff in 1881. 49 million acre-feet of runoff in 1997, 61, or I guess they said last night, 60.4 million acre-feet of runoff this year in 2011, roughly 20% more than we'd ever experienced before. And if you'd exempt 97, it was a third more than we had experienced in 1881. These 6 dams were designed to protect us downstream from serious downstream flooding, and the largest runoff event experienced. That was 1881. He used the common sense logic of the floods of 1881, the floods in 1943, the floods in 1952, accelerated the construction of the Pick Sloan program. By 1968, we had built the 6 dams. They were completely operational for the full season of 1968. They were built to protect us from serious downstream flooding, and they were designed to the design elevations necessary to protect us from the largest runoff ever. And the Corps of Engineers has always held 16.3 million acre-feet of storage as the volume necessary to protect us from the largest runoff ever, 1881. That hasn't changed over 5 different versions of the master manual, the document that governs how they manage the river. Hasn't changed at all. But neither had the largest experienced runoff in history, 1881. Now, I have to quantify that. The 49 million acre-feet in 97 was for the breadth of the year. You compress the 1881 into several months. I believe it's 4 months of runoff, but it was a shorter period of time, so the monthly volume of runoff was greater in 1881 than it was in 1997. And so the Corps of Engineers had managed this all of these years for in 113 years. We had not seen the kind of runoff that we saw in 1881. But it was designed to protect us from the largest runoff ever. This year we have the largest runoff ever, and the discharge that previously coming out of Gavin's Point, that last valve to release into the river that goes all the way to St. Louis, was the largest discharge was 70,000 cubic feet per second. This year, because of the large volume, and the discharge became 160,000 cubic feet per second, substantially more than twice as much volume as we'd ever seen before coming through Gavin's Point. Designed for a large amount of that, and it did hold together, and the system held together very well upstream. But here's the problem, Mr. Speaker, and that is that the Corps of Engineers has determined that this runoff this year is an anomaly, that it's a 500-year event. And so in a 500-year event, they wouldn't change their management of the river substantially because they argue that it's unlikely that it will ever happen again. My response to that is, a year ago, standing here, no one knew we were going to get the runoff in 2011. The odds of this kind of flood happening that has happened to us in 2011 weren't any greater than they are for the same thing happening next year. And it's the equivalent of the risk for 2012 are the same as they were for 2011 for a runoff of that magnitude for a number of reasons. But the simple one is this. If you flip a coin twice in a row and it comes up tails twice in a row, what are the odds that it'll come up tails 3 times in a row the 3rd time? Now, that's just one of those classic examples of statistics. You might think that the odds get to be 1 in 6 or something like that, but truthfully, the odds are 50-50 that that coin will come up tails the 3rd time in a row. If you flip it and it's tails 6 times in a row, what are the odds that it'll be tails the 7th time? 50-50. Because we don't know next year whether there's going to be any more or any less runoff than we've had this year. The odds are the same, except that because of the damage to our system, our levees and our storm protection, because of all of that damage, we're not as prepared to deal with a runoff of that magnitude as we were coming into 2011. So the risk is greater, even though the odds of it happening again next year are the same. And no mortal that's looking at 113 years of records, and maybe a little more than that, can tell you what a 500-year flood event is. It's not within the capabilities of mortal man. And the reasons are because if you're going to calculate the odds of a 500-year event, you would have to look across several thousand years to try to find a pattern to see if you could make that prediction. How many times did this kind of runoff happen in the previous 2,000 years or the previous 3,000 years? I mean, that 3,000 years would only be 6 different increments of 500-year events. Would it happen 6 times over 3,000 years? Who knows? We have no records to go by. So it's a judgment call made by somebody sitting in an office somewhere, probably in Omaha, that this is a 500-year event, therefore they're not going to change the way they manage the river. They got by okay for 113 years, not managing the river all of that time, just since 1968. But this time, we got burned really badly, Mr. Speaker. And I want to make this point that to visualize this thing that members of Congress haven't seen, not very many of us, the public hasn't seen, hardly at all. Think of this. Think in your mind's eye of what it looks like to go up to the northwest, near the northwest corner of Iowa, South Dakota border, Sioux City, Iowa, and look at a Missouri River bottom that was flooded with water all summer long from around the first week in June until the first week in September. That's 1.5 miles wide where normally it's a few hundred feet wide, and go downstream a few more miles and the river's 8 miles wide, hill to hill, and go downstream a little further to Omaha, right where Interstate 680 goes across, and the water is 11 miles wide. And once it goes through Omaha, Council Bluffs, Glenwood, that compressed it down within the levees that miraculously held, or we would have had a similar to Katrina event in Council Bluffs where we had at least 30,000 people living below the water level in their homes. If there's a breach in that dike, they get flooded like they did in New Orleans. But downstream from there, the river that was narrowed up to go through the cities widens out again 4, 5, 6 miles wide on down into Missouri, and Sam Graves can tell you the rest of that story. Now that's water from hill to hill in many cases, and water that's not sitting there stagnant, Mr. Speaker. This is water that is flowing out in the channel 11 to 12 miles an hour and out against the hillsides, oh, let's just say 6 miles away from the channel, or 7. That water is still flowing at 4 to 5 miles an hour and 12, 14, 16 feet deep. Farm buildings, businesses flooded up to the eaves. They're built on the highest piece of ground in the bottom, by the way. This water flowing at 4 or 5 miles an hour, dropping sand, debris, not as badly as I thought, but debris, and sand now that's laid out over thousands of acres, some of it 6 feet deep everywhere, drifts of sand, dunes of sand that are 10 or 12 feet deep. The trees that are up and down the river that have stood in water for 3 months, most of them will be dead next year. Farms have been destroyed. Thousands and thousands of acres have been destroyed. That's the magnitude of this flood. Now we have to put the pieces back together. And some people have lost a lot, and they can't be made whole again. There are others that will find a way to put it back together. There's a lot of indecision. Floods, that's the nature of floods. And we have trouble getting definitive answers to people. But if they're underwater, June, July, August, into September, if their building sites are surrounded by an ocean, and I have boated to these farm sites, I've flown over it a number of times, they're sitting in the middle of an ocean where it might be 5 miles to dry land. And that's the happy family home where they've invested their future. We can, at the minimum, even though we have some programs, we have some individual disaster assistance, there's some ag assistance, there's also some public assistance for the public utilities that are there, but there's not enough to put the pieces back together. The least we can do is manage the river system so that this doesn't happen again with the similar runoff that we have this year. We built the Pick Sloan program, the 6 reservoirs, to protect us from the largest runoff ever experienced. Now we have a larger runoff. I cannot comprehend how it isn't just simply an automatic to lower the water level marginally in the upper 6 reservoirs to have the storage capacity to protect us from this type of runoff. And just to do the math on it, the bill that I've introduced requires the Corps of Engineers to manage the river to protect us from serious downstream runoff in the event of the largest runoff in history. That's not, it just, all it really does in the end is it replaces 1881 with 2011 flood year. Not particularly complicated. Yes, they have to lower some water levels, but if those water levels are lowered, the effect of that isn't nearly as dramatic as some of the people have described. First, there were some, I will say, some things that alarm people when their Corps announced that they would have to lower the water levels 12 feet, and that was too much, and they couldn't manage the river. I looked into that. It was 12 feet on the upper 3 reservoirs, not on all 6, and that was with 70,000 cubic feet per second at discharge at Gavin's Point, that lowest valve that we have there just upstream from Sioux City. After a series of questions, they did another analysis. They raised the flow of the discharge up to 100,000 cubic feet per second, and just the adjustment of that in the upper 3 reservoirs changed the 12-foot lowering elevation down to 6. We should be able to deal with 6 because historically, since 1968, on average, Fort Peck has been 7.4 feet below the target elevation. We just lower the target elevation 6 feet, it's still higher than the average of what Fort Peck was. That's also true of each of the dams in the top 3, which is the only ones they wanted to adjust because they're the largest. So that's the effect of the bill, but it also has the effect of protecting us from flooding, serious flooding downstream. And I'm asking my colleagues, Mr. Speaker, to sign on to this bill, particularly those who represent the Missouri River bottom area, those of us who have been affected by the flood, those of us who represent Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, and Missouri. And by the way, all the delegation in Iowa, Democrats and Republicans, have signed on and endorsed the bill. Most of Nebraska has. A lot of the Missourians that are affected have. I'd ask the others, take a look. This isn't complicated. The red herrings that have been drug across the trail have been addressed and corrected, and the meeting last night in Omaha was I will say, volatile and dynamic with people that have suffered all summer long. They want to be able to make plans on whether they should be investing in trying to put their farms back in shape. They can't do that, Mr. Speaker, unless we give them some assurance that we're going to manage the river to protect them from serious downstream flooding. And while that's going on, we just set that highest priority up. Congress has the authority. In fact, we have the obligation to set the standards for the Corps of Engineers. If we fail to do that, they are then whipsawed by all of the litigation that comes of all the special interests. Those special interests can be taken care of below the level that I'm suggesting, and they can have those same level of priorities that they had within that. Irrigation, barge traffic, electrical generation, recreation, fishing, all of those things can work at that level without hardly even noticing it upstream. But you notice it downstream, and the billions of dollars that it takes to put this back together from the damage can never be matched by the recreational investment that goes on upstream. They'll have it anyway. It won't be diminished in any appreciable way, and we need to have the protection. So, Mr. Speaker, that's I believe that's H.R. 2942. I have trouble remembering that bill number. I could be wrong, but it's a King bill, and I appreciate all those that have co-sponsored it, and I'm hopeful that the rest of the Missouri River will representative will take a look at it, and I'm under the understanding that there will be a companion bill introduced in the Senate, and hopefully it will be bipartisan. That will give us some more inertia to get this done this fall while there's still time to address this issue. If we fail to do so, this river will be managed for another year, and at the same way it was in this past year. And so, could I inquire as to the amount of time I have left?
Yes.